Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dennis Washington, the host of Plant and Water. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm excited to be joined once again with Richard Hart, the pulpit minister at the Deerfoot Church of Christ. Richard, good afternoon. Hope you're doing well, buddy.
Doing great, Dennis. Good afternoon, brother.
Thanks so much. For folks that maybe this is the first time to catch an episode of Plant and Water, can you just kind of fill
Right.
everybody in briefly about what the show's about?
Yeah, exactly. First Corinthians chapter 3 in verse 6, Paul says that I planted and Apollos watered, but God provides the increase, and neither he who plants or he who waters is anything but God who gives the growth. And it's interesting, in Corinth, they're dealing with an issue of them really putting more stock in the planter and putting more focus on the waterer, on Paul and Apollos, of Cephas and of Christ. And he talks about, is Christ divided? They were saying that they were of these specific people, that they followed these speakers. And he's saying, we're nothing. We're just simply here to plant and to water. And so something that we've done is every week we have something new behind me. And actually, I brought my plant with me. And so I have my plant. This is an angel wing begonia that my great grandfather planted. And when my wife and I got married, my mother gave me a cutting, and so this is a little cutting of that. But it's supposed to be the straw coming out of the Coke bottle, and the Coke
Love it.
bottle is from Belize. As we were on a campaign this year, it's got you can maybe see Coca-Cola Belize there, and so I kept it, and so I have a constant reminder of planting and watering and what we're doing in Belize, and so
Love it.
that's what that represents for
That
me. And
is
that is
so
soil,
that's
not Coca-Cola.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, no,
and I drilled a hole in the bottom of it, so it's not going
oh,
to kill the plants.
well, we don't want to kill the plants. No, that's not the goal here. We're trying to grow.
Definitely, and in plant and water, we don't want to kill anything either, right? So,
That is fantastic. Oh, that is great. Well, let's get right into our show
all
topic
right,
today. Primary topic was about the sermon you preached this past Sunday on the prayer of a mother,
right,
and we talked a little bit about this last week, but I just love
right.
this concept about looking at the connection between the Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the
Mm-hmm,
prayer
mm-hmm,
habits, the prayer life of Jesus, and the influence that
right,
she had on that. I mean, tell us a little bit about what made you think of this as a sermon topic.
right. Well, specifically, it was Mother's Day on Sunday, and the fact that we all share that common bond and the commonality of that we all have a mother, and looking at how our mothers influence us, and I wanted to look at how the mother of Jesus, how Mary influenced him specifically with prayer. And we find that in Luke chapter 2. I think we ended the show last week in mentioning Luke chapter 2 and verse 52. And actually, I want to go there very quickly. How 52 explains how Jesus, he increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. This is in direct relation to his willingness in verse 51 to be submissive to them. He was submissive to them, and his mother treasured up all these things in her heart as he went down with them. So he increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. So the fact of him being submissive to his mother showed how he increased in favor with his father. So his mother Mary influenced him in everything when it came to his Father in heaven.
That I think that's just such a great idea, a great concept. And I guess
Mm-hmm.
by nature we think Jesus being the ultimate teacher, but Jesus had to grow up
Right.
too when he was a young boy.
That's right.
I mean, he was
Right.
the son of God, but still he was a young boy, and the influence that his
Mm-hmm.
mother had on him, I guess I'd never really thought of it like that, but I just thought that was really, really
Right.
cool analogy. It,
Well, I enjoyed just actually that concept, and that really didn't come from that discussion or looking at that passage. It was really looking at the Lord's Prayer and how he said, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, and looking at how he's saying God is to be addressed first, and his name is holy. It's set apart from every other name. And it just twigged that Mary, when she is told that she's going to give birth to the Son of God, she says that God is holy. His name is holy in Luke chapter 1, and I believe that was verse 30, or verse 46, sorry, when Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord, my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior, for he has looked on the humble estate of his servant. For behold, from now on all generations will call me blessed. For he who is mighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name." So 30 years later, Jesus just happens to include that very concept within his own prayer when his disciples in Luke 11:1 are asking him, "How do you pray?"
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, possibly his mother influenced him in how he recognized his father as holy.
Yeah.
And then he understood his lordship. He understood his mission in this life.
Right.
Through his mother.
That's such a neat idea. I want to play. I've got a couple of clips I want to play from your sermon this
Right.
past Sunday. This first one, you kind of talked about how did Jesus increase in wisdom through all of this. Let's play a little bit of this. It's about 30 seconds long.
How did Jesus increase in wisdom and in favor with God? He was in submission to his mother and his father. It could be through the submission to his mother that he learned how to grow close to his father. We find that from this passage. And so it's important that we are influenced by our mother, and that our mothers are making sure that we're seeking to influence our children to look to Jesus first, to look to the Father first.
You know, you bring that point out about in there about how, and it's true, as parents, the influence we have on our children and the importance of children to be in submission to their parents. But I guess maybe many of us don't think that Jesus was a child and was in submission to his parents because he's Jesus. I mean, he lived the perfect life. Why would someone that lived a perfect life need to be in submission to anyone on this earth? And
right,
when
you would almost
that
think
concept,
that he was exempt.
Yeah, right. I mean, I would think if there's anybody in this earth that as a child didn't need to be in submission to their parents, it would be Jesus Christ. But I mean, you kind of point out that he was, and I just think that's a really neat concept.
Right. And you know, the fact that Jesus was willing to be in submission, who on this earth could not be, you know, willing to be in submission to our parents? But of course, Paul gives us in Ephesians 6 and verse 1 the guideline to that when he says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." It's funny, that's actually the very passage that we taught our sons, Gabriel and James. That's the first verse that we've taught them. And so if there's ever a situation, I'll say to Gabriel or to James, I'll say, "Children," and he'll go, "Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." You know,
Right.
So there's this, of course, they're just quoting a passage, but it's a way that I can go from this place to show that you're not obeying your mother and father just because we're your mother and father.
Right.
It's in the Lord and if it's in the Lord, then you're going to know what is right and literally what is wrong. And so I said, guess what? It's your mommy's and your daddy's job to show you what is right and what is wrong. And so in doing that, and that's actually verse 4, I believe, it says, "And fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of your roof," right? Like, your way or the highway, or bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So it's a sobering thought for parents. We have a great responsibility for them to really mirror God for our children.
Yeah.
So that they can obey us in the Lord. And so Jesus did that with his mother, and we can follow his example, and so can our children.
You know, as you were talking about that, it one thing kind of clicked in my head. I think sometimes when we breeze through some of these verses, as we've read them and repeated them over and over the years, nurture and admonition of the Lord. I mean, goodness knows how many times I've heard that said and all. But when you think about the definition of those two words, nurture and admonition, they're almost polar opposites, but
right.
I mean, you can almost see them. You know, nurture. You think of someone nurturing as, you know, maybe not cuddling, but certainly wrap your arms around, trying to
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
but then admonition is like, but in
right.
this case,
Well,
there's,
they are polar opposites, if you will. I mean,
yeah,
but the fact is that having both brings balance. If you only have one, it's off kilter. If you only cuddle, especially when a child is needing admonition, for instance,
right,
admonish would be to discipline, to train. Sometimes that's going to be harsh in the way that we handle it, and that's when a child has been misbehaving. For instance, Jesus was being admonished here because he had remained for 3 days in the temple, and he went with them. They said, "Why did you do this?" He said, "Did you not know I must be about my Father's business?" And they didn't understand his statement, but he was willing to go with them, and to be submissive to them. He didn't say, "Mom, I'm in the place I'm supposed to be. Why don't you just go home? I'll see you later." He was submissive in that way. So if okay, for instance, say a child has had an imbalance in maybe neglect from parents. We ran a youth outreach. I mentioned this in Scotland, but also when we were in Georgia, I was in charge of an after-school program. We had 60 children every day. Some children, they would be there at 6 in the morning, and they wouldn't see their parent till 6 in the afternoon or in the evening. And there was one young man, and I said, "Well, you'll get to spend time with your family in the summer, right?" And he says, "No, I live with," and he points at a kid running by, his family during the summer.
wow,
He never saw his parents at all. And guess what? He was always being admonished. He was always, I mean, and other people in charge, I mean, they would yell at this kid. I felt so bad for them. This was a public school kind of thing, or a private school, but a secular school.
right,
And so the way that they handled this kid, and he was 8 years old, getting yelled at all the time. I sat there, I thought, okay, I got to find a way to give him a nurturing perspective, right? So he did something good, and it was hard to find that good. But when I found it, I went, "Oh man, that is great! I'm so
right,
proud of you!" And I mean, I
yeah,
gushed, because there were so many times I had to do the opposite of gush.
yeah,
But you know what? He responded so well because there was a balance. And when I would tell him to do something, he would listen because I tried to bring the balance. And so we have to see that through looking to Jesus and how his mother, influenced him, we find that balance, and we find that within Scripture, and it's vital for our lives, but it's also vital for the lives of our children as fathers and mothers.
I love it. You're right. There's so many things in our life that need to be in balance, but you think about that, the
Amen.
balance, the importance of both nurture and admonition, but nurture and admonition in the Lord, nurture in the Lord, admonition in the Lord,
Right.
the
Right.
balance of the
Not
two.
with what I think.
Right, exactly. The other clip I want to play, and I'm just going to title this one "Genie in a Bottle," which it's and it's about a minute long, but I thought it was really really neat here. Let's play that and let folks see this.
So I think it's very important that when Jesus says in his prayer, "Thy will be done," he's telling us that God's will always take place. And we need to elevate his name, but we also need to elevate his will above our own. But so often when we're struggling, we're going to go to God and we know what we need. We know what our will is. And so often we want that to take place. And it is so difficult for us to say, "Your will be done," in situations when we're struggling. But keep in mind when we see this has got to be there as an element within each of our prayers when we're approaching God and his throne. Because without looking for God's will, if we're only looking for our own will, we're literally putting him up as a genie in a bottle. Literally like rubbing that lamp and saying, "This is my wish, this is my desire, my will." Without looking for God's will, we're not getting the picture of who God is.
Wow, I hear that, and this, for starters, I think there's so many people in this world that are just struggling, that are in pain, something going on in their life, and it's so easy just to jump on Facebook or social media or whatever and ask for prayers. And goodness knows we want the prayers. We need the prayers. Nothing
Right.
against that. But this idea that so many people think, like you said, genie in a bottle, you put God on the shelf in a bottle and you just go rub the lamp when you want something, and ignore the fact that maybe there's God's will's involved here for sure, and maybe it's not exactly what you want.
Right.
I don't know. It's just, I think in this society where we just, are always connected over social media and so forth, really easy to ask for prayers, we lose fact of that bigger picture. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in the problems and of ourselves and other people that we forget maybe that God's will is involved here. Is that kind of the track I'm getting here from this?
Yeah, I see that. And, really, it's interesting. We just mentioned about balance, and hadn't even really thought about that in relation to this. But, if, say, our prayer is all we do in our relationship with God is our perspective to God, and our focus on Him in prayer, but we fail to actually look to what God has actually delivered to us in His Word, we're going to have an imbalance. And so we're not going to understand completely what's going on. And so looking at, sometimes when I look to His Word, for instance, I'm going to know what I need to ask for. I'm going to know, certain things that, is my want, is my need in line with what the Scriptures teach. Sometimes they're not. And so the more I study, the more maybe I'm going to understand that when I find God's will, I'm going to be more pleased with His will, regardless of my own.
Right. No, it's true. And I think sometimes the problems in this world can weigh on us so heavily we forget that, because we're so distracted by the problems that are around us. But it's a good
I
reminder.
like that. Distracted.
Yes.
We are distracted more than ever before with everything at our fingertips. But we need to take those fingertips and we need to put them here in prayer, but then also put them here by turning the pages. And
Wow.
that is the focus we should
It's
have.
no doubt. Well, and I think that maybe kind of leads into good. Let's talk a little bit about what you've got coming up this Sunday for the topic of the armor of God that you're planning to preach on this Sunday.
Right. Now with our mission it's come to a close, and then we had Mother's Day, and so that kind of helped focus where our lessons would be. We're now going to pick back up in our focus for the year, as we've been looking at, as iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. And so we then picked up in Ephesians 6, where in verse 10, we're told that he says, finally be strong in the Lord and the strength of His might. We can't sharpen each other if we are not as strong as iron. And so he gives us how we are to be strong in Ephesians chapter 6. And first it was recognizing our enemy. We spent an entire quarter on recognizing that we have an enemy who is the devil, and he has many schemes that he's throwing against us. But we have an armor of God that we must put on and take up. And in doing so, we are going to be protected. We're going to be prepared against the enemy, being the devil, not our neighbor, not our coworker, not someone I go to school with. The enemy is Satan, and the material that we need to use, the material that we need to put on is our faith, is the armor of God. And so we're beginning that. We're going to be looking at Ephesians 6 and verse 14. I need to turn there. But looking at the belt of truth specifically, that's the first element within the gospel armor that he says. So we'll be looking at the belt of truth.
That'll be great. I'm definitely looking forward to that. And everyone, you can join us this Sunday. We have 2 worship services on Sunday morning at 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock at Deerfoot Church of Christ on Old Springville Road in Pinson. You can also head to our website at deerfootcoc.com. I'll pull that graphic down so you can see that there. deerfootcoc.com. You can get service times, link to Google Map there where you can get directly to our church building, and we'd certainly love to have you for that. All right, Richard, it is now time for the question of the week, one of the favorites. I mean, I love looking forward to this. This is so neat. And our question of the week this week is, who made God? And I'm just going to throw that one over back to you because that's a loaded one there. I love the question, though. It's fantastic.
Right. Well, again, this came from Grayson, and it was just right at the end of our discussion. We had just wrapped up the last question for our time together with the JCA children, our second grade class, Charlotte Van Horn's class, and he asked, "Who made God?" And I said, "Wow, we need to, we're about to go into summer break. There's no time to write that down." I said, "Let's just handle that." And so actually, I'd like to go to where I went with this, and that's in Isaiah chapter 29 and verse 15. It says, "Ah, you who hide deep from the Lord your counsel, whose deeds are in the dark, and who say, 'Who sees us?' or 'Who knows us?' You turn things upside down. Shall the potter be regarded as the clay, that the thing made should say of its maker, 'He did not make me'? Or the thing formed say of him who formed it, 'He has no understanding'?" I asked Grayson, I answered his question with a question initially. I said, "Well, who made you?" So he asked the question, "Who made God?" And I said, "Well, who made you?" And he said, "God." So without even batting an eye, he said, "God made me." And I said, "Well, I'm so proud of your answer with that." And it's interesting, Isaiah is saying that God is the potter and we are the clay. But when we sit there and we say, "Who sees me?" Who knows us in regard to the things that we do in secret, the things we do in the darkness, he's saying that's turning it upside down. That turns things upside down. Shall the potter be regarded as the clay? And so this question of who made God is regarding God as clay. Who is the potter for the potter, if you will?
Right.
The concept is God is the potter. He is not clay. He is the maker. We are the clay. And so I even went into the fact that, we can look out the window, and I said, if you look at that tree, we look at this begonia here, for instance. I know where this begonia cutting came from. It came from my great-grandfather's plant that he planted several years ago, back in the 80s. And it is still alive. We've kept it going. I don't know how, but we have. We know where it came from. And I can take a cutting of this, and I can root it, and I can start seeing the roots start to grow, and I can water it, I can plant it, but I can't make it grow. This has just come on since I've planted that. And if I sit there, I'm going to try to help this, and I go to pinch it, I'm going to break it. This took so long, I don't want to even touch it. I don't want to do that. But when we sit there and we try to take a seed and we try to help it, for instance, an acorn. I go to open an acorn, and if I crack that acorn, it's going to the ground and it'll just rot. But that acorn can grow to be a 300-year-old thriving oak tree that we have right out here on our grounds. Right. It is just it's beautiful to see, and we recognize that we can take a tree. And that's what I told Grayson. Is I pointed to the chair that I was sitting in, and I said that we can take wood and look at the wonderful the rings on this wood and what it looks like. We know that came from a tree, and we can make a chair out of it. We can make this desk out of it. We can make the shelves behind me, but we can't make a tree. And that then took us to Romans chapter 1 and in verse 20. And we find it says, "The invisible attributes, namely God's eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse." So we actually know that there is a God through the things that have been created. And so to answer his question, who made God? God is eternal. Notice it said his eternal power and divine nature. That means God is and was and is to come. has he was before the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But the world was created, but God existed before the world was created.
Right.
God is eternal.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is He said, "Let us make man in our image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them." So God made us, and we all have our time in which we came to this world. But the moment He set us into existence, He started our soul. We're made in His image, eternal. That we have a point where we started, but we will live forever. And so that's the eternal blessing that we have. God just simply is.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, it's one of these things, even as adults, when you really start to try to think about eternity and the idea that something is infinite, like God, in terms of time, and so much of our lives is planned around something that has a beginning and an ending to it. It is
That's
really, I guess, difficult to wrap your brain around it. But then, for a child, even it's certainly even worse as you try to start to understand the idea of infinite, and God has always been there and will always be there. So, but yeah,
right. Well,
I think it's a great way to put that.
Yeah. I said, "Grayson, did that answer your question?" He says, "Yeah, I feel like it did." And at least he wasn't like Jackson last week and said, "Are you still answering my question? This is the longest answer I've ever had."
That is fantastic. I love that. I absolutely love that. Well, if you've got a question for Richard, you can send him a message at just go to our website, deerfootcoc.com. You can send him an email there in the Contact Us section, or richard@deerfootcoc.com is Richard's email address. So certainly do that. Well, Richard, I think it's been a fantastic show today. I just love what we've talked about, and looking forward to next week.
Looking forward to next week as well, man. Thank you for everything.